One of the things that we try to do in the libraries is bring you programming of all different types. And if you haven't been receiving our newsletter, we invite you to sign up at the back of the room before you head out today. And we will be sure to keep you in the loop of programs that we have coming up. A lot of them deal with music, art, and information, as you can imagine, since we're in the library business. Today's program is called Riding the Waves, and it's a first in a series of programs by that title. And the idea behind this is to bring together experts from Pepperdine University, our faculty, and in dialogue with outstanding people from the community who, and I think today's program is a perfect example of that. It's the kickoff program for the Riding the Waves series, and it brings together really two extraordinary folks, moderated by a third extraordinary person. And I'd like to just sort of give a very brief introduction. Tommy Hawkins, here on my right, is, you may know Tommy from his work in the world of sports. He was VP with the Los Angeles Dodgers, NBA player for many years, and now community leader. Tommy has a passion for all things, really, conversation being one of them. But I got to know Tommy a couple years ago, and one of his real passions is for jazz. So welcome Tommy Hawkins, who's going to be our MC.
Thank you. Thank you.
To Tommy's right is our guest, Kenny Burrell, who is, for those of you in the audience who are lovers of jazz or guitar or who know of his work, he really kind of needs no introduction, and I know that Tommy's going to give him a fuller introduction in a moment. I'll just say that we are delighted to have him with us today to share his thoughts about growing up in the world of jazz and the shape of jazz to come. So, Kenny Burrell, welcome. And to his right, we have the pleasure of having with us today Dr. Bernie James, who's a professor of law here at Pepperdine. He has a great many interests and a great many accomplishments. He's not here as a professor of law today, however. He's representing, as we say, one of his passions, and that's jazz. And he's a jazz flugelhornist. And I just learned a moment ago, a mallet player also, and a jack of all trades, I think, in the world of jazz. He has a passion for it, and he leads the Bernie James All-Star Band, which I can testify is quite a group. They've played in the library before, and they'll play here again, we hope, in the not-too-distant future. So with that, I'd just like to invite you to welcome our guests, and I'll turn it over to you, Tommy, to take us off.
Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you all for being here. This program was 2 years in the making. I have to, first, before we get into Kenny and to Bernie, thank the people who got this started. I first went to my friend, who I have known for over 30 years. He coached my kids in Little League baseball and everything. He's an associate vice chancellor here, Sam Lagana. And I said, Sam, I'd like to get this program started. He says, well, you're not going to start it here because I'm busy, and I've got to send you to Heidi. So I went to Heidi over here. Heidi, what's your title?
Executive Director of Crest Associates.
So we went to Heidi and presented it to Heidi. And Heidi says, you got to get together with Mark. Right? And so we went with Heidi and with Sam's blessings to Mark. And we talked to Mark about what we wanted to do in getting this going. Because my thing, I'm a sociology major. I'm a graduate of the University of Notre Dame. And my thing is we don't communicate well enough. We are so busy into our tweeting and texting and all of these things that we don't get face to face. I tell people, if you want to communicate with me, you face me, phone me, fax me, or forget me. Because I want to see your face when you're lying to me. I want to know what's going on there. But anyway, we got to Mark, and Jeanette came on to the scene, and we put this together. And we're going to bring the best of outside professional people outside of the Pepperdine area, integrate them with professionals and professors here at the university for the benefit of you. Now, I went around to welcome as many of you as I could when you came in. We've got psychology people here. We've got creative writing people here. We've got guitar students here. We've got everything. Now, this isn't for you to just sit here and listen to us babble about how much we know about jazz. This is an invitation to you to integrate yourselves with these guests. And we will do this at every session. So we will give them a chance to make their statements about who they are and how they got into what they did. And then we will open it up to you. So start thinking about what you want to ask these people. I don't want anybody biting their tongues. I want you to get into it. As Kenny would say, get down with it. We've got music to play. Are you ready to go? When I was growing up, I started listening to jazz because my brother told me, stop listening to that rhythm and blues, that syrupy stuff will rot your teeth. So he said, you got to listen to some Monk. I said, who? Some Prez. Who? Some Diz. Who? What the hell are you talking about? So he put it on and played it for me. I said, I don't know what those guys have been smoking, but they're on something. But anyway, when he left to go to the Army, I started playing his records and I started listening to it. And then there were young musicians coming up, like Kenny Burrell. And I didn't grow up wanting to be like Mike. I wanted to grow up being like Kenny, because Kenny was cool. Kenny wore the best clothes, wore the tweed jackets. He had the gabardine pants. Kenny's hair was always in place. Kenny played with impeccable taste. And I said, damn, I want to be like this man. And I got to meet him when I was traveling and playing in the NBA. I played in the NBA for 10 years and got to see him, and I have loved his music. Now, Kenny Burrell is one of the most recorded guitarists in the history of this country. He has recorded over 106 CDs. That's individually. He has recorded with other people, backing people like Jimmy Smith and Dinah Washington and people like that. Over 200 additional CDs. So we're talking about, when we're talking about a superstar, a Downbeat Award winner, international jazz recognition, we're talking about one of the greatest guitarists in the history of this country, Mr. Kenny Burrell. Kenny?
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you very much.
Kenny, what don't people understand about jazz? Why can't we adopt jazz as America's true art form? It started here, it developed here, it has gone on for close to over a century now. Why can't people get into what jazz is all about? And what should they understand about jazz?
Okay, that's a really good question. I don't know if I can give you a short answer, but I'll make it as short as possible. Number one, the essence of jazz, which means probably the most important part of jazz, is improvisation, okay? And one of the problems is that we, as a group of people, in terms of, particularly in America, in the United States, we have yet to fully appreciate the art of improvisation. So it doesn't have the value that it should have, but it is a highly sophisticated, highly developed art. And most popular music that we hear in the world today, particularly coming out of the United States, has an element of improvisation. When you hear your favorite artist, no matter what the genre, there is some improvisation. They don't just sing the notes like it's written on the paper. Otherwise, you would probably not like listening to them or buy the records or listen to them in person. So there is an element of improvisation. Jazz has the most improvisation. It's pushing the envelope. It contains the avant-garde, if you will, the further advance and continued further advance. It's the flagship of, in terms, improvisation. So that's one of the reasons, is that we have yet, because of our lack of education, which means our lack of understanding and appreciation, we have yet to begin to understand the art of improvisation. So it doesn't have the value that it should. And because of that, it is the essence, as I said, the most important part of this art form. Now, I say art form, it's an art music, which means it's highly artistic, highly developed. But at the same time, jazz is also a popular music. It's a fun music. You can snap your fingers and clap your hands and dance to it and all kinds of things. It is the only music in the world that you can do all of that to. It stands highly as an art form, and it stands highly over here as a pop form. So that's one of the magical things about it. Now, that's one reason. There's a couple of more reasons that that we are not, jazz has not received its appreciation and understanding in our culture. One of them is, as I said, lack of education in terms of this particular element. We also live in a materialistic society. Unfortunately, when we do that, we do not relish and welcome and cherish the art forms. Jazz is, as I said, a great art form. And so what we do as a society as a whole, we look for the next big thing, whatever the next big thing might be, not only in cars and automobiles and refrigerators and homes, clothes, and in music. So jazz, because of that, does not sell. Unfortunately, it is not considered in that high, how can I say, highly respected realm of music as classical. So they have to deal with what it is in terms of the popular music. And it doesn't sell in terms of what's accessible to the teenager, and that sells a lot of records, okay? So it always has a low volume of sales. So that's one of the other reasons why it is not accepted by the masses. But then on the other hand, if it were accepted by the classical music area of our culture, it would have a better chance. What I'm trying to say simply is this: I don't blame the people in popular music, critics, sales, A&R people, record companies, they have never said they're selling culture. They're selling product. And the product could sound pretty bad or pretty good, doesn't matter. But whatever it is, they want to sell it. Over here in the classical music world, they're selling what they call high art, the creme de creme. I do blame them because jazz is a high art, and it's not given a chance in this other area of music. On the other hand, it has survived because it has both feet. It has some substance over here, so it does struggle along. It keeps going. And there's one more point I want to make before, because I don't want to leave this third point out. And it's a problem with the very just human elements that there is a situation where you have entrenched, as I said, like classical music and pop music is a whole different story on both ends of it. And the door is relatively closed for jazz to get into this realm of classical music, which is, for the most part, European classical music. And there's nothing, it's a great music, but jazz deserves an equal chance. That's all I'm saying.
Which it doesn't get, because you can't play top 40 with jazz. Young people, you're young students, you want to know, well, what's the hit of the day? You know, we're going to hear it and everything. And Kenny mentioned the word improvisation. Improvisation. I know that a lot of you are sitting out there right now saying, what the hell is improvisation? What does he mean when you have a song? And Bernie, I will let you start on this, and we'll get to Bernie James, because Bernie decided a long time ago that he loved jazz, he loved playing jazz, but he wasn't going to put any food on his table. Kenny Burrell Kenny Burrell is a survivor. He has had a career in jazz. He is the head of jazz at UCLA. He plays all over the world. He has recorded and everything. He has made a living at it. Bernie decided he'd play the trumpet and the flugelhorn on the side, and he'd get on with something that was going to bring him a paycheck every month.
Whatever works.
So, Bernie, how would you look at your first appeal to jazz and what you understand about improvisation?
Well, the lure of jazz, from the listener's point of view, is the structure of the song. And jazz is an alluring art form because for those of you who have your famous or favorite jazz songs, if you were to match your list with someone else's favorite list, you might not have the same song titles or songs with the same tempo or even songs with the same key or structure. But if you looked at the artist, Kenny and I and Tommy and the other folks in the room would all say those are jazz tunes. So you see what's happening is that as an improvisational art form, jazz makes itself fit in to the structural moment. Now, that helps define improvisation, really. It's the gift of the jazz artist who knows what the structure of the song permits to fill that structure with as many thoughts as possible. And I use the word thoughts purposefully because some jazz performers fill it with as many notes as they can scramble in given the cadence of the song, and others will use silence, punctuated with comments from time to time. And some of my favorite jazz tunes involve as much silence as purposeful use of notes, and it's all included in improvisation. And so the structure never changes. which is why some of you have come into jazz, and God bless you, and I mean that, by hearing a top 40 or top 50 or top 100 song that provides the structure for some very purposeful and creative comments by an improvisationalist. Well, I think that's an okay way to begin knocking on the door of jazz appreciation, because in the background is a performer who's taking those chord changes and that structure and giving you something very nice to think about. I call it, and I'm not the only one, ear food. And the jazz musician becomes a famous chef in structuring the meal in just the way that you find that you like it. I will say only one more thing about improvisation. Kenny knows this because he's at the top 0.5% probably of people who not only fear improvisation, they love moving from chord change to chord change. But speaking for the rest of us who dabble as musicians in jazz, nothing is more frightful, Kenny, than to miss a chord change, because you can't get it back and the song continues without you, and your creative process is expected to keep time. And therefore, even among performers as well as listeners, there is this interesting relationship with jazz. It does make us feel good, but I think it slightly keeps us on edge at the same time.
Kenny said something to me. I picked Kenny up today. I wanted to make sure that he got here and everything, because this is very important to me, Said, I'll feed you, I will pick you up, I will take you home, whatever it takes, but I want you here. He and I had a discussion on the way over here from UCLA. And Kenny, you talked about improvisation in terms of how you look at the chord changes and the structure of a song, and then you insert yourself and your feelings and your thoughts into the expression of that song, and wherever you go with it, but you got to stay in tune, in time, and you got to look at the harmony, and you got to look at the chord structure. And you said to me, I asked you in the car, when was the breakthrough for you when you knew that you could improvise, and what was that all about? Now, if you look at, let's say the LA Philharmonic, you look at the stand, they have notes. They play as written. You ask them to improvise, and oh no, I can't do that. No, they can't do that because they are structured. Jazz people not only have the structure, but they have the freedom of expression. So Kenny, get into that for me. What was that like for you when you were a young musician, you were a young guitarist, and you wanted to get into improvising, putting yourself into a song, putting your feelings into it, and also keeping the spirit of the song?
Well, when I was very young, and say 13, 14 years old, I really became serious about trying to play music. And I got a guitar and was very fortunate to have an older brother who played the guitar, and he was my brother Billy, and he was 11 years older than me, so he was able to give me some instruction. And one of the things I observed about Billy and his musician friends who would come by the house occasionally is that they would play the song. Now, the word improvisation wasn't even talked about. It was playing. And so from my perspective, that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to play the song, play the melody, and do some interesting things after the melody. Okay, now it's improvisation, but I wasn't thinking about that. To me, it was just playing the song, making it interesting. if you didn't do anything with the song, with the melody after, it wasn't very interesting. Anybody could just sit down and play the melody if they could read or just finger the stuff. And then that was part of the culture that I grew up in. So this was early on. In other words, the bottom line, improvisation was a built-in part of my concept about how to play music, how to make music, make it meaningful, make it feel good, make somebody else react in a nice way. In other words, to really deal with it. And that's how it started. Then later on, as I got better, I really concentrated on my technique and learning how to really read well, read music well. But the first part of my music had to deal with simple improvisation.
Okay, Burley, you play the flugelhorn. One of your favorite people was a personal friend of mine, Shorty Rogers, who has passed on. Great arranger and everything, and you listen to Shorty and everything. Why did you move from trumpet to flugelhorn? Now, a trumpet is smaller and, you know, the straight bell. A flugelhorn is a trumpet with hormones, okay, if you will. It's a little bit bigger, the sound is a little bit softer and everything. And if you ever get a chance to catch Bernie, he will play something beautiful for you. As you got on with jazz, and you knew you weren't going to be a Kenny Burrell, and you wanted to get on with your law work, what is it that kept you tied to the music for all of these years?
I'm grateful to you for asking that, because as it turns out, with most people in any art form, our love of it came from our association with people who mentored us or who taught us and who stayed in our lives. And they modeled for us the good behavior on how to make room in an adult workaday lifestyle for music. And I hope you don't mind if I mention a few names in this regard.
Please.
Because as I began law school at the University of Michigan, I met an appellate court judge by the name of
Hold on. You mean you spent time in Detroit where Kenny is from?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Kenny
Go
knows
ahead.
where my first house was, where my wife and Connie and I built a living, and then sold before coming out here in the mid-'80s. But I met this judge on the Court of Appeals whose name was Myron Walls. He's a Chicago fellow, your hometown.
My hometown.
And he grew up around Ramsey Lewis and that group over there.
Oh,
and
my God.
He was a pro.
You're going to make me cry.
Yeah. Well,
Go ahead.
He hired me to be his law clerk, which did two things for me. One is that it sprang me into this job, because law degrees don't get you into teaching unless you do an apprenticeship in something that tests you in the fire of both writing and analysis, and law clerking does that. So he sprung me into this job, but he took summers off to go on the road in Europe with the Lionel Hampton Band. And he played keyboards for Lionel Hampton. Then he would come back to Detroit and expect that his cases would all be written and caught up on. That was my job. And then he would tell me all these stories about what would happen when Ahmad Jamal would elbow him off the piano, and he would play, and they would tour in this place and that place. And you know what that did for me? That let me know that no matter what my day job, I could find room for music. And when I came to Pepperdine, I immediately began looking for opportunities to play with students and with other professionals, some of whom were in their worship band or others that recorded but kept day jobs. Like one of my colleagues here, Scott Weckel, who is a master's expertise in guitar, who happens to be a former pupil of Kenny, and I think he knows everything there is to know about.
This is incestuous, you know that.
Yes, it is.
All right, go ahead,
But
please.
he's an example of what happens to people like me who get workaday jobs outside of the field, but because we had good mentors, Kenny, we now know how to keep a foot in the business. Isn't that wonderful? And that's exactly how it happened. And I've stayed with it. And every year, a different group of students do it. And one of my reasons for being here is that the students that are here in Seaver and graduate school who want to continue to play, along with Mark Russo, who plays a mean saxophone, I've been led to believe, will sign up for this year's band.
You mean we have a Charlie Parker follower right here in Mark? He never told me that he played saxophone. This is incredible. You know what I'd like to do right now? Is Jeanette here? Can we hear something from Kenny? I want you to hear him. Yeah. And while you're listening to, I don't know what selection you're choosing, but okay, Kenny, is there something that you want?
Which one do you have up?
I've got all except for this album, so.
Why don't you do, just as an intro, do the first one on the solo album, maybe, Tenderly.
Tenderly.
That's the first track on the solo.
Kenny, while we're queuing this up, Kenny is a scholar on the music of Duke Ellington. He has taught Duke Ellington's music and the life and times of Duke Ellington at UCLA for, 35 years now? And one night in New York, when I was traveling, you knew where to find me after a game. I'm in the clubs, Birdland. I'm at the Village Gate, the Village Vanguard. We move on to Chicago. I'm at the London House in Mr. Kelly's. We move on to San Francisco. I'm at the Black Hawk and the Matador and all of these places, catching all the jazz that I could. But one night outside of a steakhouse in New York, Duke Ellington. Now, for those of you who don't know Duke Ellington, he's one of the greatest composers of music in the history of the world. He composed over 2,000 pieces of music. He kept his band together for over 50 years. He traveled over 10 million miles all over the world. He is one of the most creative people. Igor Stravinsky and Leopold Stokowski praised him as one of the greatest composers in our history. And Duke Ellington ran into young Kenny Burrell, who was just in New York trying to make a name for himself. And what did Duke Ellington say to you, Kenny?
Well, the first time I really had a chance to converse with him was one night at the Hickory House. I was outside the Hickory House, you're right.
Right.
And he knew my music because Ellington was very aware of what was going on in the music business, which was one of the reasons why he was able to survive these choppy waters of the music business. So he was aware of all of the young musicians and the middle-aged musicians, the older musicians, and the music business in general. So the car pulls up and he walks out, and there's Duke Ellington, and everybody parched away, stepped back and Mr. Ellington, and he paused to talk to me for a few minutes, and then he said, "You know what? I'm going in to have dinner. Why don't you join me?" Of course, I said yes. I'm going to say no. I'm just one of the young musicians hanging around the club, and so I went in, and that was my first lengthy encounter with the maestro. And it turned out around that time, he had said in the New York Times that I was his favorite guitarist. And that was a lifetime lift for me for that, as Tommy has described him, for him to say that meant a lot to me. I didn't quite know what it all meant, and the more I thought about it later, I realized it was truly important, and considering the source of where it came from, it's wonderful. So from that point on, I was able to say I was acquainted with him and friends to some extent of the maestro.
I have to tell you my Duke Ellington story. I used to hang out. I love to hang out. I'm going to write a book one day, hanging out, and the people with whom I have hung out. One night in New York, the Four Seasons restaurant, five-star restaurant, was opening up. And I wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to have a midnight dinner at the Four Seasons. So I walk into the Four Seasons. And this little man runs up to me. He says, "Tommy Hawkins?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "We were at the game tonight. You guys beat our Knicks. Nice going and everything." He said, "Duke Ellington would like you to join him for crepes." I said, "Yeah, and Howdy Doody wants to talk to you." Wants to talk to you too. So he says, "No, I'm not kidding." So he points over to the table, and Duke is waving. "Come on over. Come on." And I said, "What the hell is going on here? This is great." So I go and I sit with Duke, and we have crepes, and he's asking me about basketball. I'm asking him about his band and everything. It was great. And I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Ellington." I ran to the bathroom, and back in those days, they had telephones in the bathroom. So I put my coins in the telephone, and I called my mother in Chicago. I say, "Mom, you won't believe this. I'm having crepes with Duke Ellington." She says, "You better get back to the hotel. You're supposed to be playing basketball, not hanging around the streets with all of these people." She didn't understand. Kenny Burrell has a knack of injecting all kinds of feeling and thoughts and moods into his music. His latest album is a solo album, and he did a compilation of all of many of the solo works that he's done. And the number one tune on this album is Tenderly. Now I want you to listen to Tenderly very carefully. And then at the end of it, I want you to talk to this man. I want you to ask him questions. I don't want you to bite your tongue. I want you to think about what it is about him and what you've heard that gets to you. And I'll take a show of hands and we'll go on from there. So Maestro, if you will, Tenderly, Kenny Burrell. Absolutely incredible. Your turn. For the best question, I have 2 CDs. I found some duplicates in my collection that I will give away to the best questions as judged by Mark and Jeanette. To Kenny. We'll go from one side of the room to the other side of the room. You've heard him talk, you've heard him speak, you've heard him play. What do you want to ask this man? I'll take a show of hands. I'll take this lady first. By the way, is he good or is he good?
Hello, I'm Camille. That was amazing. But I want to know which...
Camille is from
Maryland.
Maryland.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
go ahead.
So I want to know what your inspiration for that one song is. It's a 2-part question, / what journey were you trying to take the listener through in that particular piece?
I happen to like the song for many years. I like the melody a lot, and the harmony is wonderful. And the song has a certain mood, tenderly. I like the lyric content very much. And it's one that, for whatever reason, you get inspired to do certain things with songs. And in this particular case, I was inspired to do some slight changes on the harmony, not completely change it, but to resolve it in a different way than that if you're a musician, you probably heard that in the beginning. And also, I felt it lent itself to solo guitar, just me by myself. And so that's why I did it. It felt very comfortable for me. I love the song. And so it just came to me that it would be a good idea to do that. In terms of there was no message that I can clearly define to you, or that I was trying to, the journey that I was trying to go on. The journey has to do with my philosophy about improvisation, whether it's solo or with a group, is to play what you feel, follow what you're hearing, what you think really sounds good, and let it flow. Particularly if you're playing solo, the music, let it flow. And the only restrictions we have are within ourselves in terms of fear, in terms of the idea we might make a mistake. But just like I'm talking to you right now, I'm improvising. Everything we've set up here so far, there's no script, we've been improvising. I'm improvising now. And I feel okay as long as I can clearly tell you what I'm thinking. I'm not worried about the fact that I may slow up for a moment or speed up for a moment. That's irrelevant. The most important thing is the message to you. And that's the most important thing when I'm playing. The message from inside that comes out in the music. Now, of course, there's elements, there's chords and there's notes, but there's more to it than those things. I can only say that let the music flow and be a part of what you're really feeling is what I tried to do.
Did you get the feeling? Yes? Okay. Yes, sir, right here.
My name is Sammy. I'm from Detroit. I'm with the Malibu Chronicle.
Did you say Detroit?
Yeah, he says he's from Detroit.
I actually just moved here, so
The people are like good fertilizer. You're everywhere.
we are. We just love transplanting everywhere. So I've loved jazz for a long time. My dad actually inspired me to fall in love with jazz. And one thing I always find so beautiful is when an artist just goes on a riff, as I say, but as you say, improvise. At what point do you, or do you, Bernie, decide that you want to start riffing and you want to start just giving it your own soul to the piece?
I can't quite hear him.
He wants to know at what point that he grew up with jazz. His father got him into it and everything, and he likes the fact that you could just get into it. At what point did you feel that you, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that he could just get into himself?
Yeah, you just start improvising and you just start playing what you feel. Like how much of that song do you actually follow, and how much of it do you let it flow naturally and improvise from what you feel?
Okay. It's like talking. The more you do it, the better you become. It's very similar to talking. In other words, I'm using words. When I play an instrument, I'm using notes. The more I do it, the easier it becomes. And I'm trying to express some thoughts to you, and when I'm playing the notes, I'm trying to express some thoughts there as well. When I'm playing the notes, however, there's another kind of thing going on. It's a spiritual thing. It cannot be defined like by subject matter. In other words, I'm trying to tell you right now about improvisation. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to do, explain to you about my improvisation. I'm improvising when I'm talking to you. But when I'm playing the notes, there's a whole nother thing going on which I don't understand. And that happens, but that's the beautiful part of it. We're dealing with the spiritual part of who we are. And that is that underlying power, if I will, if I may, behind the notes, behind the flow, behind the chords, behind the structure, behind everything, if you allow it to happen. That takes courage. You can't be afraid. You've got to be yourself. And that's the key. All of your favorite artists, your favorite musicians, your favorite artists, your favorite writers, your favorite whatever, be themselves, right? There's only one of those people. And that's the key. That's the lesson, one of the main lessons I got from Duke Ellington. Be yourself, because you can't be anybody else anyway. All of the other bodies are taken. So, you know, be who you are and be a good one. Be a good one. And so that's the best I can tell you about that. But I had some nice advice early on in my life in terms of, you know, play your own kind of things. Don't copy other people. You can listen to them and learn what they do, but you can't stand on that. Who are you? You know, you got to have your own stuff. And so I learned that early on, and it's worked.
In other words, walk right in, sit right down, baby, let your mind roll on. Okay? That's called Hawks vernacular. Other questions? I'll take this gentleman, and then I'll take the lady in there. Yes.
I'm going to stand for this, if you don't mind. And pardon my voice, I'm kind of hoarse today.
Mine's bad too, don't worry.
Oh, okay. Worry I will not do. Tommy, when you introduced the song, Tenderly, that was played, you said, I want you to think about this. And
Yes.
there are two things in jazz, and one of them is thinking. Jazz is such a deep, richly layered music that can be simple or it can be very complicated, but it's many layers deep. And it is something that you can't just let go by you. If you're going to enjoy it, you have to listen to it, you have to think about it, you have to concentrate. And the other is the feeling. After the first chorus, when the beat started and Kenny really got into the improvisation, you get this tempo. And there are people in this audience that I was watching that you were tapping your feet. Your heads were bobbing. There were others that didn't. And I think that's also part of what defines a jazz audience. If you feel it, if it gets into your soul and your heart and every fiber of you, then you're a jazz fan. But if it just passes you by and you don't have that feeling inside that just says, this is who I am, then you can't really enjoy jazz. You asked for a question. So Kenny, I'm just going to ask you this question. Do you agree with this next quick statement? And that is, jazz and pop were almost one and the same back in the 1940s. And then along came bebop, which was much more complicated than what had been played before. And again, so you needed to think about it. And then along came rock and roll, which was the simplest music being played. 3 or 4 chords, and that was all you needed to know. And they diverged from that point of view, and more people could really assimilate to the rock and roll music than had the time or the ability to think about the jazz music, which was getting much richer, much more complicated, and took much more brain power, really. So do you think that's where one of the reasons why the audience today for jazz is so much smaller than it might have been?
I think that's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons. There's other reasons. there's other reasons. I think I talked about that earlier. And I would have to say I agree. I agree that that's one of, but there's other reasons. And thank you for your comments. You seem to understand what's going on here with this business. Yes.
Yeah, he does.
Let me say in one response about the popularity of jazz is if you'd bother to get on a plane and you'll need your passport, you'll see a whole nother thing happening with jazz about the time you reach the European continent. But don't stop there. Keep going east and you'll see some other things happening as well. People dress up in tuxedos and patent leather shoes and fill orchestra halls to hear jazz in other parts of the world. And it is right there with classical music, wouldn't you say? And I'm always stunned when I travel to small clubs and places in other countries where my wife and I found ourselves a few years ago. When you say that you are a musician, they'll invite you right up to the front, and they will expect that you'll have something to add if you mention that it's jazz that you play. And that's the reason why some jazz greats travel a lot, and why a lot of them don't keep a permanent address in the United States. Indeed, some of them don't return except to play a gig.
Because they get better recognition and better appreciation and more overall appreciation in European countries or Eastern European countries than they do here in this country. Also, I'd like you and Kenny to address the fact that we have been brought up with 3-minute records. 3 minutes, that's it. If you can't see it in 3 minutes, forget it. You know, we can't have it. Now, Kenny may want to go on for 5 minutes or 7 minutes. Jazz allows you to do that. But commercially, in this country, you look at all your 45s and 78s and all of those things, 2 minutes, 45 seconds, 3 minutes, and you're out of here. You know, don't take us any further than that because we don't want it. And the American attention is such that after 3 minutes, they're not interested in what you have to say. Would you and Kenny please address that?
Well, Duke Ellington broke the 3-minute sound barrier. he recorded the first record that had to take 2 sides, so that was one thing. But it's not as bad as it was, but it's still bad, and we're caught up in a situation where, again, I have to go back to the idea of the simplicity of our listening. Our listening capability in terms of paying attention. In general, we seem to be preoccupied with things that distract from a deep appreciation of serious music, and jazz is a serious music. It's also a very popular, enjoyable music, but it's also a serious music. And so it doesn't sell a lot. And even classical music is suffering for various other reasons in terms of sales. So we have a ways to go if we're going to go anyway. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to where we were in the 50s and the 40s, and I don't know if we'll ever get back to that in terms of the appreciation of American music, and I underline the word American. I don't know if we'll ever get back to that. I hope we can, because it is so rich and varied, and it is the gift to the world. It's one of the main things that we have given and transported to the world. And as you point out, people all over the globe appreciate this music. I was in a taxi one day, maybe about 15 years ago, and just in some European city, and I was looking, just riding in a taxi, and I saw this big billboard, and it said 500 years of no, not 5. It said 200 years of great music, And, this is the radio station broadcasting, announcing itself, and then it said Bach and Beethoven, blah, blah, blah. And at the bottom it said Ellington. I said, wow, I'm so glad to see that. The point is, that's just one example of the fact that how this music is cherished and respected around the world. One of the reasons why that Ellington's name was there, because he did such great music with the long form, like the classical musicians. He used it in long form, not what you hear in the pop music or jazz generally. The long form like they use in classical music. Ellington excelled in that. And that's another story that you can look into if you want to see all of the wonderful things that Ellington did. But the thing is, I hope that we can get back to the appreciation of American music, because what we will be doing is getting back to the appreciation of who we are. And I'm not sure we'll do that. We're a little bit too preoccupied with ourselves and what we're going to get next and what we're going to do next. And I think that's one of the problems that we have as a society in terms of just getting along. Sharing more positive things is very important.
In other words, jazz is not McDonald's or In-N-Out Burger. Jazz is going out and sitting down and having a nice dinner and taking your time and enjoying it. You had a question. Please.
Well, I'll take myself out of the contest because I work here, but I do still have a question. So I'm from New Orleans, and we're fond of saying, quoting Louis Armstrong, how he says, if you have to ask what jazz is, you'll never know. So prefacing it with that, can you each maybe say a few words about what jazz means to you personally? Like for me, I'd say it reminds me of home, it makes me feel connected, so forth. So I was just curious as to what jazz means for you personally. I know it's a big question.
Okay, we'll start off with Bernie on that. Jazz, what does jazz mean to you?
It is, for me, it's become a part of my daily structure. There's that morning prayer, afternoon or evening prayer, and Bible reading that I work into my day. But you know what? I practice every day. And there's something to work on every day. And one of the reasons is that musicians never know where they're going to be when they'll be asked to join in. And when I travel and lecture, I travel with my instrument. And strange things will happen. I found myself in Gillette, Wyoming this June, sitting in with a bluegrass band. And it was an event for state employees, and the governor walked in and started running for office. There was an election coming up. But even he stopped and enjoyed a little jazz playing with bluegrass. But it's a daily structure thing for me. There are chords to work on. You're from New Orleans. Louis Armstrong said, if you miss one day practicing, the next time you perform, you know it. You miss 2 days, and the band knows it. And if you miss 3 days, he says, the audience knows it. And his point is, you just have to stay. You have to stay with it. It's a good question.
Kenny.
I would say jazz represents the most advanced form of American music. And that's what it means to me. We have various forms of American music, various genres, and all of them are good. There's no bad one that I can think of. But jazz represents the most advanced form and has remained that. And it, in some circles, it is called the classical music of the 20th century. But, my thing is it really represents America, which we're talking about North America, with the United States.
Well, you're from New Orleans, and I'm a student of jazz. I mean, there isn't one day that I don't read about or play jazz. My neighbor is here, and we've been neighbors for 28 years. And I had never taken him into my music room. So about 3 weeks ago, Kenny, I took Mike Ferris into my music room, and I started to he looked, he said, "Oh my God," because there are pictures and there are CDs and there are albums and everything. So he says, "Do you have any Stanley Turrentine?" So I said, "Of course I do. As a matter of fact, I've got one that I have a duplicate for." And I played for him. He says, "I'd like you to have that tune." I says, "Well, I've got a duplicate of this whole CD, and I'd like you to have it." The next day, he's pulling out of his driveway, and as loud as he could play it, he's blasting Stanley Turrentine. So jazz is there. But New Orleans, Wynton Marsalis, Al Hurt. Do you know who gave Wynton Marsalis his first trumpet? Al Hurt. Al Hurt. New Orleans, just a great, that was such a place where everything was happening. Now, Mark, I know we have some more questions, so if you don't mind, can I take these questions? Okay, this lady.
From the Bay Area 2 days ago. And San Francisco has good jazz, and sad to say, San Francisco Yoshi's Jazz Cup closed down because...
That's where Kenny used to go every year, once a year.
I just won some tickets through my PBS station for your concert, and I couldn't go because I was sick. But I'm here. It's a great jazz group here, and everything is wonderful. I'm a businesswoman who's moved to Malibu just to live a new life here. But I'm from India, and Indian classical music is everywhere. I tried to get some free radio station because I only have internet in my condo. I could find sitar. I could not find KCSM, my Bay Area radio station. I could not find a free jazz music station. In San Francisco, we have these free classical concerts. There's no free classical jazz concert anywhere. You need to tell me today what we can do as grassroots. I trained my 7-year-old son. I took him to Yoshi's Oakland while it was there. Every single Sunday they had very, very cheap concerts for kids and parents to come. And he has taught everybody in his high school, introduced them to jazz. Grassroots level, what would you recommend? And this is a university, I'm sure there probably is a course in it or something. How can more people learn about jazz? I was introduced to it in Cleveland, and that's where from Indian music, I came to Cleveland, and I loved jazz. So please teach.
Are you saying how can people learn more about jazz?
Because I think it starts grassroots.
Right, I understand.
I think, just UCLA, every student there have a bumper sticker, I love jazz, or I don't know, something like that. How can we get people to know?
I teach at UCLA. I'm the director of the Jazz Studies program there. And you can take some of our classes there through extension. There's a UCLA extension, and you can take some classes there.
I want the public to be aware. I am very...
Okay.
Kenny, please tell her what you're doing with your jazz orchestra.
Yeah, but that's in the works.
Okay.
But this,
all right.
But this is something that is actually happening. We're on a quarter system at UCLA. We have 3 quarters. One starts in the beginning of October, the beginning of January, and the beginning of April. At the end of those quarters, we have 2 concerts by the students, directed by myself and others. These are jazz concerts, open to the public, free to the public. The next one is on December 1st and 2nd. The first, we have our small combos, and we have about 6 and plus a vocal combo. And on the second, we have our big bands. We have 3 big bands. This happens every quarter at UCLA, and it's free. So in terms of the public, if you want to come, you're welcome to come, and all you have to do if you want to follow up. If you don't want to write the date down now, you can just, okay, you can go online. It's Schoenberg Hall at UCLA, December 1st and 2nd. Every quarter we have these concerts. Now, I'm sure other schools have it, but I'm not familiar with their schedule. I'm just telling you what our schedule is. And we'll be happy to have you, especially with your interest in the music. And I really thank you and appreciate that. So I'd love to see you there and be able to talk to you again about that.
And if I may suggest one more in addition to that, and that's a great one because you'll hear stuff that you may not hear performed anywhere else. Every Friday at the LA County Museum of Art is free jazz.
Oh, that's right, it is free.
You'll have to get there early because it looks like a European park by the time everyone crowds in. But it's every Friday. And some of the bands repeat and other bands not so much. But the quality of the music is quite good.
Very good.
I think you'll be pleased, don't you?
Very good, yeah. Lackawanna, that's where it is. Los Angeles County Museum of the Art, Lackawanna. That's on Wilshire Boulevard.
Wilshire Boulevard. Okay, time?
It is time.
One more question. This gentleman.
Thank you, thank you. My name's Tasso, and just a quick little anecdote. I started playing guitar in high school, and like every young guitarist, you become obsessed with Jimi Hendrix at some point or another. And the reason I discovered you is because there's a quote from him about you saying, "I want that Kenny Burrell sound," and I read it somewhere. And
that was in the Malibu Chronicle. I wrote the article. And this is my publisher, Vera Mahajan, right? Another Indian that you may want to get to know because she's around town. But anyway, that's the article that I wrote on Kenny, and that's a true quote from Jimi Hendrix.
yeah, exactly. It really is. And so that led me to your music, because I said, "Who's Kenny Burrell?"
Thank you.
So I got the Midnight Blue album, which
Thank
changed
you.
my life.
Thank
And there's
you.
a bunch of guitar students in this room who this week got your check. G Baby Anna been good to you, and so thank you for that. And my question is, amongst your direct contemporaries, doesn't mean the style could be classical. Guys like Bream Williams or in rock, Jeff Beck, or the blues, maybe Steve Ray Vaughan. Was there a contemporary that you had in a different art form on the guitar that you really respected and admired?
Well, you mean you want me to name some names?
Or who is a contemporary that you really respected and admired? Just could be one name that didn't play jazz, played another style of guitar, but you would listen to and you thought, I really like what this guy's doing.
I would rather not mention any names right now.
No problem. No problem.
But let me just tell you, I deeply appreciate, as I mentioned earlier, all the other art form, all the other genres in music right now. And there's some great musicians in all of them. Mm-hmm. Are you thinking about becoming a guitarist professionally, or are you already?
Yeah, I already am. Well, working towards it, but yeah, already, yeah.
Is that what you want to do?
Well, it is what I'm doing, yeah.
Okay, so you know that there's room for you if you have an identity. If you get an identity, there's room for you. If you don't, then you're just going to be another average guitar player gigging around. But if you have a strong identity and you have a message that's meaningful, and that's coming from within, and you can articulate your ideas, that means you got to have good technique and practice a lot. And last but not least, you're consistent this week, next month, next year. Keep that high level up, then there's room for you. But that's not always easy, but those are things you must do to make room for yourself. But there's room. So good luck.
Thank you.
Okay.
One last question. Right.
Presenting a paper next month. I'm appreciating jazz, how it goes in beyond the art form itself. And the paper I'm presenting next month is called So my question to you, since you're over the Monk Institute at UCLA, is what do you think was his great contribution to jazz that, even if you want to juxtapose it a little bit with Ellington, what was his great contribution to jazz that you sense in being over the Monk Institute, and why his name may be connected to it?
Well, number one, very important jazz compositions that are original in their elements, harmonic, melodic, rhythmic. Okay? And not only were they those things I just mentioned, but there were a lot of them. There were numerous compositions. And these were compositions that came from his deep side, which means they had a spiritual quality to them, which means they touched the other musicians, which made them want to play these compositions, including myself. There's something special about that music. And it's just not putting notes on the paper or playing on the piano. This is coming from deep of who Thelonious Monk was. And that's why the music lives on. As we mentioned Ellington, of course, but that's why his music lives on. And he's considered one of the great jazz composers. A lot of people wrote a lot of songs, but they didn't have that special quality. Yes, and some people, for example, say that the songs had some weird notes in them, and his solos had weird notes in them. Well, that's not by accident. That's on purpose. It's on purpose based on what he wanted to do. It's an honest articulation of what he's feeling. And you can't go wrong with that. If you're really honest to who you are, then people are going to say, hey, you know, that's who he is. He's different. But that's the way it is. And so I think, I hope I answered your question. I'm happy to, what he was saying is that we now have the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz at UCLA, which I'm certainly connected with because I'm the director of jazz over there. But this is a powerful organization. Once every 2 years, they have a competition worldwide, and they bring musicians to study, now at UCLA, they used to be at UCA and other places, but to study and get a master's degree in jazz. And every 2 years, they get a new group. And so highly respected and talented musicians, unbelievable. Based on the quality of those kids, and I have to say on the quality of some of the kids we're graduating, that in terms of the music itself, it's going to be in good hands. And I think that, just the last point, this institute dedicated to Monk, I think is really important because here's a guy who was criticized for being different and weird and all that stuff, but so were some of the great people in history. You know, some of the great people in history were criticized as being different and weird. But the point is, those people remained strong and courageous to be who they were. And that's why they are now our heroes. So Monk is one of them.
Okay, and I'm going to close with this. You're taking notes on Monk. When you research him, you will find that he started out playing piano in Harlem in his mother's church. And he was considered an avant-gardist. But anytime you listen to Round Midnight, which is almost the national anthem of jazz, right? You got to think of Monk and all of the different things that he did and that he poured into his compositions. And I can't wait to read that paper. Mark, we're going to give it back to you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say to Bernie, thank you so much for getting us started. There is no better friend than Kenny Burrell and no greater musician. I guarantee you that. And Mark, we look forward to the next session, but please.
Well, thank you to our guests.